Alien Commanders, Amusing Report on Human Military Academy. Part 1. The Assignment Nobody Wanted. Grand Commander Vethal had lived for 300 years. He had seen stars die. He had sat at tables with creatures that had no eyes, no mouths, and no patience. He had signed peace treaties in languages that did not use words. He had done all of this without once losing his composure. But when Senior Counselor Plorix slid the assignment scroll across the desk toward him, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt dread. "You want me to go to Earth," he said. "Yes," said Counselor Plorix, still reading her own datapad, as if this was a completely normal thing to ask someone. "To observe their military academy." "Correct." "For 6 months?" 6 months and 2 weeks, actually. The extra 2 weeks are for the written report. Vethal picked up the scroll. He read it slowly. Then he read it again. He put it back down on the desk and looked at the counselor with the calm, professional expression that 3 centuries of public service had built into his face like stone. "With respect," he said, "is there anyone else available?" "No," she said. "You leave Thursday." He left Thursday. The journey to Earth took 11 days by standard Galactic Council transport. Vethal spent most of it reading everything the Council had on file about humans. It was, to put it politely, a confusing collection of documents. One report praised their creativity. Another warned about their stubbornness. A third, written by a Dorvac trade observer, simply said at the end, "I do not know how to explain them. I have attached 17 pages of notes. I still do not know how to explain them." Vethal read all 17 pages. He was not sure they helped. What he did know, from the broader records, was this. Humans had been members of the Galactic Council for 11 years. In that time, they had helped end 2 wars. They had introduced a drink called coffee that was now banned on 3 planets due to what the medical community was calling dependency concerns. And they had built a military reputation that made older, larger, more experienced species quietly uncomfortable in a way that nobody talked about at formal dinners, but everybody whispered about in hallways. The facility he was being sent to observe was called Fort Dryden Military Academy. It sat in a region of Earth called Colorado, at a high altitude, and from the photographs in the file, it looked like someone had built a collection of gray stone buildings in the middle of a mountain, and then dared the weather to do something about it. The weather, based on the climate charts, had clearly accepted the dare. He landed on a gray morning. The air was cold and sharp, and smelled like pine trees and something he could not identify. He stood on the landing pad, with his travel case and his datapad and his best professional expression, and looked at the mountains in the distance. They were very large mountains. Commander Vethal. He turned. The human walking toward him was a woman, short and lean, with dark hair pulled back under her uniform cap, and eyes that were doing the specific kind of looking that meant she was already taking notes. She wore the uniform of a lieutenant. She walked like someone who had never once been in a hurry, because she was always exactly on time. "Lieutenant Carol Briggs," she said, stopping in front of him and extending her hand. He shook it. Human greetings still felt slightly strange to him, but he had practiced. "Welcome to Fort Dryden. I'll be your liaison for the duration of your assignment." "Thank you, Lieutenant." "First question," she said, already turning to walk toward the main building. "Have you ever been to a human military base before?" "I have not." "Have you ever seen a human military training exercise?" "Only in recorded footage." She nodded as if this told her something useful. "Okay, so, a few things to know before we go in. The cadets know you're here. Most of them are curious. Some of them will try to show off. One of them will probably say something ridiculous directly to your face within the first hour. And I'm sorry in advance for that. It's just how they are." She paused. "Also, don't look too alarmed by the morning training routines. I need you to understand that what you're about to see is normal. It is all completely normal." "That is a strange thing to say," Vethal observed. Yes, she agreed, but you'll understand why I said it. She was right. He understood, almost immediately. He was given a brief tour of the facility first. The academy was large, spread across several dozen acres. There were classroom buildings, training fields, obstacle courses, firing ranges, a medical wing, and a large central hall that the cadets used for meals. Everything was clean and ordered, and looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. So far, so normal. Then Lieutenant Briggs took him to a viewing platform that overlooked the main training yard, and told him to watch. The cadets were running. This was not in itself unusual. Many species trained their soldiers with physical activity. What was unusual was the nature of the running. It was not flat ground running. It was running up a long hill, and then back down and then up again, wearing full equipment, packs on their backs, heavy boots. The morning was cold enough that their breath came out in clouds. Vethal could see that several of them were struggling. He could also see that none of them were stopping. A large human male in a drill instructor's uniform was standing at the bottom of the hill, and he was not watching quietly. He was talking, very loudly. A stream of instructions and observations and motivational statements, delivered at a volume that seemed to serve no acoustic purpose, since everyone could hear him already, but which appeared to be very important to the process. "Who is that?" Vethal asked. "Sergeant Dale Kowalski," Briggs said. "Best drill instructor in the academy. 3 tours of active service. He has a voice that can carry across a football field in a thunderstorm." "Why is he so loud?" She thought about this for a moment. "Because it works," she said simply. Vethal watched a young cadet near the back of the group, a tall young man who was clearly exhausted, slow down slightly on the 3rd trip up the hill. Sergeant Kowalski noticed. Sergeant Kowalski said several things, loudly, in the cadet's direction. The cadet straightened up and ran faster. "What did he say to him?" Vethal asked. "Nothing I can repeat in formal company," Briggs said. "But the general meaning was, you can do more than you think you can, and I'm going to stand here until you prove it." Vethal wrote this down. It was 0620 hours. He had been on the base for 40 minutes. He already had 2 full pages of notes, 1 serious question about Galactic Council training philosophy, and a growing suspicion that 6 months was not going to feel very long at all. He watched the cadets run up the hill again. The young man who had slowed down was now at the front of the group. Vethal wrote that down too. Alien Commander's Amusing Report on Human Military Academy. H2, Part 2, The Nature of Human Training. By the end of his 2nd week at Fort Dryden, Vethal had filled 1 full datapad with notes and started a 2nd. He had also developed a habit of standing very still and staring at things for long periods of time, which Lieutenant Briggs had started referring to as his processing face. "You're doing the processing face again," she told him one morning, handing him a cup of tea she had started bringing, because she had noticed he found human coffee too intense. They were standing on the upper walkway above the main training field, watching the first-year cadets begin their daily physical session. "I am thinking," he said. About the fact that those cadets were awake at 0500 this morning, ran for 40 minutes, ate breakfast in 12 minutes, and are now preparing for 3 more hours of physical training, after which they have 4 hours of academic classes." He looked at her. "When do they rest?" "They get 8 hours of sleep at night." "That is not what I asked." Briggs smiled. "They rest on Sundays, mostly." Vethal returned to his notes. In the Galactic Council's records, there were dozens of military training programs from dozens of species. Some were long, some were hard. The Dorvok trained their soldiers for 4 years in controlled environments where every variable was managed. The Celian Guard put their recruits through a 2-year program of mental conditioning and precision drilling. Both programs produced excellent soldiers. Both programs were, by design, as consistent and controlled as possible. Fort Dryden was not consistent or controlled. It was, by design, the opposite. He watched Sergeant Kowalski lead the first-year cadets through what the training schedule called Team Load Carry. Each team of 8 cadets was given a log, a real log, heavy wood, rough bark, no handles. They had to carry it together across an uneven field, around a series of obstacles, and back again. The teams that dropped the log had to start over. The noise was immediate. Everyone was talking. Everyone had an opinion about how the log should be carried, which direction they should go first, who should take which position. For approximately 90 seconds, it looked like organized chaos. Then, without any single person clearly taking control, each team settled into a rhythm. They adjusted. They figured it out. One team in particular caught his attention. Their log was slightly heavier than the others, or so it appeared from the way they were moving. A young man near the back, a first-year cadet named Owen Bright, was clearly struggling with the weight. He was tall but lean, not yet built for this kind of work. The person beside him, a short and solidly built young woman named Laura Kim, shifted her grip and quietly moved her hands to take more of the load, without saying anything about it. Owen noticed. He adjusted his own grip. The team kept moving. Nobody had told them to do that. It was not in any instruction Sergeant Kowalski had given. It simply happened because they were watching each other. Vethal wrote 4 lines of notes about this and underlined them twice. After the log carry, Sergeant Kowalski gathered the cadets and did something that Vethal had not seen once in any of the other species' military training footage he had studied. He asked them what went wrong. Not in a punishing way, not in a way that was looking for someone to blame. He stood in front of 42 sweaty, tired first-year cadets and said, in his large carrying voice, "Tell me what didn't work." The cadets told him. A lot of them talked at once. Kowalski let it happen for a moment, then pointed at individuals and listened to what each one said. He nodded. He asked short follow-up questions. Then he said what should have been done differently, and he explained why, clearly and without making any cadet feel stupid for the mistake. The whole thing took 6 minutes. Then he sent them to the next exercise. "He does this every time?" Vethal asked Briggs. "Every time," she confirmed. "He corrects them in real time, on the same day as the mistake. You learn faster that way. Let a mistake sit for a week before you talk about it, and the cadet has already half forgotten what it felt like. You talk about it while it's still fresh, they remember." He wrote this down. Then he asked to see the weekly training schedule for all 4 years of the Academy program. What he found was something that, on paper, looked like a standard escalating curriculum. First year focused on physical conditioning and basic tactics. Second year added leadership responsibilities. Third year introduced command exercises. Fourth year was almost entirely independent project work and real-world simulations. Straightforward enough. What the schedule did not show was the layer underneath it. The informal layer. The culture. He started to notice it in small things. The way fourth-year cadets helped first-years without being asked, because someone had helped them the same way 2 years ago. The way cadets who failed an exercise in the morning were not pitied or avoided, but were instead likely to find one of their peers sitting next to them at lunch, talking through what happened. No judgment in their voice. The way humor moved through the whole place like water, turning up in the most unexpected moments. There was a second-year cadet named Nathan Cole, who had a gift for this that Vethal found genuinely confusing at first. Cole was not the strongest or the fastest cadet in his year. He was not the top of his academic class. But he was the person that everyone seemed to orbit during the hard exercises. He had a way of saying exactly the right slightly funny thing at exactly the right terrible moment that broke the tension without breaking the focus. During a particularly brutal afternoon run, when the whole group had gone quiet in the specific way that meant everyone was simply enduring, Cole said loudly and cheerfully that he was pretty sure they were all going to die, but that the view was excellent. The group picked up their pace. Vethal watched this happen and then stood still for a long time. "The processing phase," Briggs noted. "He made them faster," Vethal said. "He made them feel like a group again, instead of 40 individuals suffering separately, she said. That is a skill. Some people have it naturally. The ones who have it naturally tend to do very well here. Vethal thought about the Dorvok training program, which explicitly prohibited unnecessary conversation during physical exercises. He thought about the Celian Guard program, in which humor was considered a sign of insufficient focus. He thought about those programs producing excellent soldiers. He thought about Fort Dryden. He was beginning to wonder if excellent and extraordinary were different things, and if so, which direction the gap went in. He stayed on the walkway for another hour after Briggs left for her afternoon duties. Down on the field, the cadets had moved on to a new exercise. Owen Bright was keeping up fine now. Laura Kim was beside him, same as before. They had been a group for 2 weeks. They already knew each other's limits. Vethal added another page to his notes and started thinking about what he was going to write in his first monthly report to the council. He already knew one thing. Whatever he wrote, it was not going to be what they expected. H1, Alien Commander's Amusing Report on Human Military Academy. H2, Part 3, The Classroom, the Chaos, and the Word Improvise. In his 3rd month at Fort Dryden, Vethal began sitting in on classroom sessions. He had requested permission from the Academy's commanding officer, Colonel Ray Sutton, a quiet and careful man who had the kind of eyes that were always thinking about something 2 steps ahead of whatever was currently being said to him. The colonel had agreed without hesitation and told him he was welcome anywhere on the campus. Then he had added, almost as an afterthought, that the cadets in Captain Reeves' tactics class might give him a headache. Why? Vethal had asked. The colonel had smiled. You'll see. He saw on a Tuesday morning. Captain Dana Reeves was a small human woman with short brown hair and the natural energy of someone who had been moving fast since birth and had no plans to stop. She taught a course called Adaptive Tactics Under Resource Constraint, which was listed in the Academy's official curriculum as a second-year tactics elective. Looking at the course description, Vethal had expected something fairly structured. Lecture, notes, perhaps some diagrams on a board. He arrived to find the cadets already seated, and Captain Reeves standing at the front of the room next to a cardboard box. Nothing else. No slides on the screen, no notes on the board. Just her, the box, and 30 cadets who were looking at the box with the cautious expression of people who had been in this class before and knew what a box meant. Okay, Reeves said. She picked up the box, walked to the center of the room, and turned it upside down. The contents fell onto the floor. 4 lengths of rope, 2 plastic buckets, a folded tarp, a small bag of sand, 3 empty tin cans, a whistle. She stepped back and looked at the class. You have these items, she said. You have 25 minutes. Show me a defensive perimeter for a 4-person team. Nobody raised their hand to ask for clarification. Vethal, sitting at the back of the room in an observer's chair, waited for someone to ask for clarification. Nobody did. Instead, approximately 2 seconds of silence passed, and then the room became very loud. Chairs scraped. Cadets moved to the pile of items and started picking things up, examining them, putting them down, picking up other things. 3 separate conversations started at once. A young man named Phil Ortega held up one of the tin cans and said something to the cadet next to him. The cadet said something back. They both picked up rope. Laura Kim, who Vethal recognized from the training field, was already drawing a rough diagram on a corner of her notebook. She was talking while she drew. The cadet beside her was arguing with her diagram. She crossed something out and drew it differently. The other cadet nodded. Vethal looked at his datapad. He pulled up the Galactic Council's Combined Tactical Doctrine Index. He searched for Emergency Defensive Perimeter Construction. He found 14 relevant chapters across 6 species military manuals. Not one of them mentioned tin cans, rope, a tarp, sand, or plastic buckets in combination. 17 minutes and 50 seconds later, the cadets had built something on the classroom floor using all of the available items. The tarp was rigged between two chairs at an angle that Captain Reeves called decent concealment. Not great, but decent. The rope had been used to create two tripwire lines at different heights. The tin cans, each partially filled with sand, were threaded onto the lower rope, so that anything walking through it would drag the cans and make noise. The buckets were placed at the ends of the perimeter lines, weighted down, serving as anchor points. It was not elegant, it was functional. Captain Reeves walked around it twice, hands behind her back, saying nothing. Then she said, "The tripwires are too close together. If someone finds the first one, they'll find the second one at the same time. Separate them by at least 1.5 meters. Everything else, good work." She looked at the class. "Why does this matter?" she asked. "You all have access to actual equipment. You're going to graduate. You're going to go into the field. And you're going to have proper gear. So why are we doing this with garbage?" A cadet named Marcus Grant raised his hand. "Because gear gets lost, or damaged, or you run out. And the mission doesn't stop just because your gear does." "Correct." She picked up the whistle from the floor and held it up. "The whistle is useless for a defensive perimeter. So why did I put it in the box?" Silence. Then another cadet, a quiet young woman named Katie Ford, said, "To see if we would waste time trying to use it." Reeves pointed at her. "Also correct." Vethal was writing as fast as his stylus would move. He spent the rest of that week in Reeves' classroom. Each session was different. One class had cadets design a communication plan using only paper and hand signals. Another had them read a tactical scenario with 3 critical pieces of information missing, and explain how they would act anyway. A third session had them sit in pairs and take turns deliberately giving each other wrong information, then figure out how to identify which information was wrong. That last one, Vethal found particularly striking. He asked Reeves about it afterward in the hallway, while she was drinking from a large insulated cup that she carried everywhere and that smelled strongly of coffee. "You are teaching them to assume they might be lied to," he said. "I am teaching them that information is never perfect," she said. "In a real situation, someone gives you a report. Maybe they saw it right. Maybe they were scared and they're misremembering. Maybe communications got garbled. Maybe someone on the other side wanted you to hear exactly what you just heard. You can't freeze up just because you're not sure. You have to act on the best available information while staying open to being wrong. This is very different from how most species train their soldiers," Vethal said. She looked at him with mild curiosity. "How do most species train their soldiers?" "They teach them the correct answer," he said. "Then they teach them to execute the correct answer as precisely as possible." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "The problem with that," she said slowly, "is that the correct answer assumes the situation is the one you planned for. Situations are not usually the ones you planned for." He had nothing to say to this, because it was obviously true, and he was not entirely sure why it had taken him 300 years and a Tuesday morning in Colorado to hear someone say it so plainly. He also attended a different kind of class that month. A senior psychology instructor named Professor Alan Voss taught what the catalog listed as leadership psychology. It met twice a week. It was, as far as Vethal could tell, a class almost entirely about feelings, about fear and how to function inside it, about doubt and how to lead when you were not fully sure, about the weight of making decisions that affected other people, and how to carry that weight without being crushed by it or pretending it wasn't there. In one session, Professor Voss told the 4th-year cadets something that Vethal copied into his notes, word for word, because he wanted to make absolutely sure he had it right. "You will make bad calls," Voss said. "Not because you're not good enough, because you're human, and you're working with incomplete information in a moving situation. A bad call made with good reasoning is not a failure. A bad call made because you were too afraid to make any call at all, that one is." The 4th-year cadets, most of them 22 years old, sat and listened to this with expressions that told Vethal they had thought about it before and had not yet finished thinking about it. He stayed late in his quarters that night, reading back through his notes from the past 3 months. He had come here expecting to document a training program, a curriculum, a system. What he was actually documenting was something harder to put into words. He was documenting the deliberate construction of a certain kind of person. Someone who could think when they were tired. Someone who could build with whatever was available. Someone who could lead while they were still afraid. He started drafting his 3rd monthly report to the council, and deleted the first version because it was too dry. He started again. He wrote, "The humans are not just teaching their cadets what to do, they are teaching them what to be." He thought about this for a while. Then he decided it was accurate. H1. Alien Commander's Amusing Report on Human Military Academy. H1. Part 4. The War Game and What It Revealed. H2. In the 4th month, Fort Dryden held its annual large-scale training exercise. The cadets called it Operation Bronze Shield. The Academy staff called it the most important training event of the year. Lieutenant Briggs called it the one where everything gets interesting, which Vethal had learned by now was her way of preparing him for something he would not fully understand until it was already happening. P. The exercise ran for 48 hours, across 40 square kilometers of Colorado terrain. 400 cadets were divided into 2 forces. Blue Team was the defending force, tasked with holding 3 key positions across the exercise area. Red Team was the attacking force, tasked with capturing those positions within the time limit. Both teams had maps, radios, blank ammunition, sensor tags that registered hits, and access to the same basic equipment. Neither team had anything the other didn't. On paper, it was a fair fight. Vethal was given a command observation vehicle, a large truck with wide windows and a small table, from which he could follow the exercise and receive live position updates on a tactical display. Lieutenant Briggs sat beside him. Colonel Sutton was in a separate vehicle with the exercise judges. The whole thing had the atmosphere of something important, and the cadets, for all their usual noise and humor, were visibly focused as the starting signal went out. Blue Team's overall commander was a 3rd-year cadet named Marcus Grant. Vethal remembered him from Captain Reeves' classroom, the one who had said the mission doesn't stop just because your gear does. He was 21 years old, medium height, with a calm face that did not show very much. He had been given command of 200 cadets. In the Galactic Council's records, the youngest battlefield commander of any species on record had been 34 years old, and that had been considered remarkable. P. Vethal watched Grant's initial deployment with his full attention. What he saw did not match the plan that Blue Team had submitted before the exercise began. According to the plan, Blue Team was supposed to set up strong defensive positions at all 3 key locations and hold them directly. This was straightforward. This was what the terrain and the numbers suggested was correct. The exercise judges had reviewed the plan and approved it. Instead, Grant split his force into units smaller than his plan had specified. He sent 2 of these smaller units to positions that the terrain map showed as tactically weak, exposed hillsides with poor cover and no obvious defensive value. He placed his main force at only one of the 3 key locations instead of all 3. And then, within the first 3 hours of the exercise, he ordered a slow retreat from even that position. "He's losing," Vethal said. He said it flatly, not as a judgment, just as an observation. His tactical display showed Red Team advancing confidently, pushing toward the retreating Blue Force, calling in their positions. They were loud on the radio, which the exercise judges were monitoring. They thought they were winning. "Keep watching," Briggs said. She had her coffee. She did not look worried. By hour 6, Red Team's forward elements had followed the retreating Blue Force into a long valley between 2 ridgelines. The valley was the obvious route. It was wide and flat and easy to move through quickly, and red team was moving quickly because blue team appeared to be running. By hour 9, the two blue units that had been sitting on the useless hillside positions above the valley had moved into Overwatch. They had been there for hours, quiet and still, while red team walked below them and never thought to check. By hour 12, the blue units that had appeared to be in full retreat reversed direction. They did not announce this. They simply stopped retreating and started advancing from the front of the valley. The other blue units came down from the hills on both sides. Red team's forward force, nearly 80 cadets, was surrounded from 3 directions inside a valley with no easy exit. Their command element, which had moved up to direct the final push, was cut off from their support units before they could call for help. The exercise judges marked the engagement. Red team's command element was effectively neutralized in under 5 minutes. Vethal sat very still in the observation vehicle. His tactical display showed the full picture now. He could see what Grant had done. The retreat had not been a retreat. The weak positions had not been tactical errors. Every piece of it had been placed deliberately to lead red team exactly where blue team wanted them. The whole opening phase of the exercise had been a door being held open, and red team had walked through it confidently, because that is what you do when the other side appears to be losing. That maneuver, Vethal said carefully, is not in the Academy's tactical curriculum. I have read the curriculum. No, Briggs agreed, it's not. Where did he learn it? We'll ask him, she said. They asked him after the exercise concluded. Marcus Grant was sitting outside the debrief tent eating a plain cracker with the unbothered expression of someone who had done exactly what he intended to do and was now just waiting for the paperwork. He stood up when he saw Vethal approaching, which was a courtesy, and then sat back down when Vethal waved at him to relax. Cadet Grant, Vethal said, the Valley Encirclement. Where did that come from? Grant thought about it for a moment, partly from the history class, the Canine material, partly from a strategy game I used to play. Partly I just looked at the terrain maps the night before, and thought it seemed like it would work. Vethal absorbed this. A game, he said. Yes, sir. Strategy simulation. I played it a lot when I was a teenager. And the history class material? The Battle of Cannae, 216 BCE, Hannibal Barca against Rome. He let the Roman center push forward, and then wrapped around both flanks. Classic double envelopment. I just used the terrain instead of a flanking cavalry, because I didn't have cavalry. You adapted a 2,200-year-old battle tactic to fit a 48-hour cadet exercise in Colorado. Yes, sir. Vethal looked at him for a long moment. Grant looked back with the relaxed expression of someone who did not realize he had done something remarkable, which was possibly the most remarkable part of all. How old are you? Vethal asked. 21, sir. He thanked the cadet and walked back to the observation vehicle. Briggs fell into step beside him. The strategy game, Vethal said. A lot of them grow up playing those, she said. Command and conquer style. Logistics, terrain, resource management. They start at 12, 13, 14. By the time they get here, it's already in their thinking. He thought about this for the rest of the afternoon, while the exercise continued and red team's remaining forces tried to reorganize, and blue team pressed their advantage with a steadiness that suggested Grant had already planned for this phase too. He thought about it during the debrief session, where Colonel Sutton walked through the key decisions, and Grant explained his reasoning in a clear and organized way that made the whole thing sound obvious in hindsight, though it obviously had not been. He thought about the Dorvac, who spent 4 years teaching their soldiers approved doctrine in approved sequences. He thought about the Celian Guard, who drilled the same scenarios until the responses were automatic. He thought about what it would mean to have an army full of officers who had been informally learning strategic thinking since they were children, through games, through stories, through history classes that connected ancient battles to modern problems. All of it sitting in the background, available to be pulled out and adapted when the situation called for something that wasn't in the manual. That night, alone in his quarters, He sat down at his writing table and started on the section of his report he had been putting off for weeks. The section about potential. He wrote, "The frightening thing about human military training is not what they teach. It is what they do not have to teach, because the culture has already taught it." He stared at the sentence for a while. Then he added, "This is not something that can be replicated by adopting their curriculum. It would require adopting their entire way of raising young people. I am not sure the Council fully understands what it is looking at." He saved the document. He went to bed. He did not sleep well, but not because he was worried. He was too busy thinking. H1. Alien Commander's Amusing Report on Human Military Academy. H2. Part 5. The Final Report, and What Vethal Left Out. H2. On the last day of his 5th month, Vethal sat in his quarters at Fort Dryden and looked at everything he had written. It covered 2 full datapads, 1 paper notebook that Lieutenant Briggs had given him, because she said sometimes writing by hand helped you think differently, and 14 separate audio recordings he had made of his own observations late at night when the words were coming too fast to type. He had notes on physical training, classroom instruction, leadership development, unit culture, psychological resilience, adaptive tactics, the role of humor, the role of failure, and 3 separate sections just about Sergeant Kowalski's voice and its effect on first-year cadet performance, because he had determined early on that this was genuinely worth studying. He had more material than he had ever gathered for any assignment in 300 years of service. Part 5. He also had a problem, which was that he was not entirely sure how to write it all up in a way the Council would fully understand. The Council was used to receiving reports about military programs that were quantifiable. Drill repetitions, test scores, physical benchmarks, pass rates, graduation numbers. All of that information existed for Fort Dryden, and he would include it, because it was accurate and it was good. But it was not the point. The point was harder to put into a table. He started with the official summary, because that was what the Council would read first, and probably most carefully. He wrote it 3 times before he felt it was right. The final version said, in plain terms, that Fort Dryden Military Academy produced officers of exceptional quality, that the program's emphasis on adaptive thinking and psychological resilience gave its graduates an unusual capability for operating effectively in uncontrolled and unexpected situations, and that in his professional assessment, the human approach to military education was the most sophisticated he had encountered in his career. He used the word sophisticated deliberately. He knew it would get attention. He intended it to. The full report ran to 311 pages. He wrote the section on physical training methodology first, because it was the most straightforward. He wrote the section on classroom instruction second, and spent 3 days on it, because what Captain Reeves was doing in that room deserved more than a paragraph. He wrote a long section on unit culture and the role of social cohesion in performance under stress, which referenced Nathan Cole by initials and cited his effect on group pace during endurance exercises as a measurable phenomenon rather than an anecdote. He wrote 12 pages on the wargame exercise and Marcus Grant's Valley Maneuver. He included a full tactical diagram. He noted Grant's age, his sources of inspiration, and the fact that he had adapted a pre-space-like battle tactic to modern conditions without being asked and without any formal instruction in that specific scenario. He added a line at the bottom of those 12 pages that read, "This is not an exceptional cadet. This is an average product of this program." That is the most important sentence in this report. He wrote about Owen Bright, who had struggled in the first weeks and was now one of the stronger performers in his year group. Not because anyone had carried him, but because the culture of the place had made it impossible for him to stay where he was. He wrote about Laura Kim, who had quietly redistributed the weight of that log on the first day without making it a moment, and how that small action was the entire philosophy of the place in miniature. He wrote about Phil Ortega, completing a navigation exercise with no equipment, using stars, 40 minutes late, and receiving not a penalty, but a commendation for judgment. He wrote about Professor Voss's class on leadership psychology, and the simple fact that humans thought it was worth spending formal class time teaching their soldiers about fear and doubt and the weight of command, rather than pretending those things did not exist. He wrote a section he titled, "On the Function of Humor in Military Training," which he suspected would be the most controversial section with the Council's more traditional members. He had watched, over 6 months, humor function as a tool for unit cohesion, as a pressure valve during extreme stress, as a form of communication that moved faster and deeper than formal instruction, and as the specific mechanism by which a group of people who were suffering together became a group of people who were suffering together on purpose and by choice. He wrote it all down clearly, and he stood behind every word. He did not write everything. He did not write about the evening in month 3 when Sergeant Kowalski had found him sitting alone on the training field steps after dark, and had sat down beside him without asking, and said, "So what do you think of us so far?" And they had talked for an hour about what the military was for, what training was for, what it meant to prepare a young person to face the worst things a world could produce, and send them in anyway. Kowalski had talked about his own recruits with a plain and steady kind of care that had nothing performative about it. Vethal did not write about that because it was not the kind of thing that fit in a report, but he thought about it often. He did not write about the week he had gone with Lieutenant Briggs to watch a night navigation exercise and lost track of the cadet group entirely. And the two of them had stood in the dark Colorado mountains for 2 hours, talking about nothing much. And she had pointed out stars he had traveled near and never actually looked at. And he had thought that it was strange to have spent 3 centuries among the stars and learned their names and distances and compositions, and never quite seen them the way a human woman was showing them to him now, just as lights in the dark that were beautiful for no practical reason. He did not write about the moment, in month 5, when a first-year cadet whose name was Danny Cho had stopped him in the hallway between classes and said very seriously that his older brother served in the Galactic Council's Joint Fleet, and that his brother had written home to say that the alien officers he served with were some of the best people he had ever worked with, and that he, Danny Cho, age 18, wanted Vethal to know that humans felt the same way about the Council, and that he hoped the report was a good one. Vethal had told him it would be. He finished the report on the morning of his last full day at Fort Dryden. He read through all 311 pages one final time, corrected 3 small errors, and submitted it to the Council's secure data system. Then he closed his datapad and sat quietly for a while. Lieutenant Briggs knocked on his door an hour later. "The cadets want to do a small send-off dinner," she said. "Nothing formal. They've been cooking all afternoon, which means there's going to be food from about 6 different countries, and at least one thing that nobody can identify. I would be glad to attend," he said. The dinner was held in the large central hall. Someone had pulled several of the long tables together and covered them with dishes that represented, as far as Vethal could tell, approximately half the Earth's cuisines. There was a rice dish from somewhere in Asia, a stew from somewhere in the Americas, bread from what Briggs told him was a very old recipe from Eastern Europe, and something fried that nobody could agree on the origin of, but that everyone agreed was good. Nathan Cole gave a short speech. It was funny. It was also, underneath the funny parts, something else. Cole talked about what the Academy had cost all of them, and what it had given them back. And he talked about it in a way that was so direct and so easy that Vethal had to remind himself that this was a 20-year-old human who had been here for 2 years, not a seasoned officer at a retirement dinner. He had that quality, the one that was hard to name, where the right words came out in the right order and landed exactly where they were supposed to. Vethal laughed at the funny parts. He had not planned to, he simply did. After dinner, he stood with Briggs near the doors, while the cadets cleaned up around them, moving tables and washing dishes with the same coordinated ease they brought to everything else. "Good report?" she asked. "A good report," he confirmed. "What's the main conclusion?" He thought for a moment that the rest of the Galactic Council should pay closer attention to what is happening here, and that the humans have built something that is very difficult to explain and very easy to underestimate. He paused, and that the underestimating is a significant mistake. She nodded, as if this was about what she had expected. Will they listen? She asked. Some of them, he said. The ones who have worked with humans will understand it immediately. The ones who haven't will read it and think it is an exaggeration. He looked around the hall, at 400 young people cleaning up a dinner they had cooked themselves, laughing and talking, 2 weeks from graduation and 6 months from their first real assignments. And then they will meet your people, and they will stop thinking it is an exaggeration. She raised her coffee cup slightly in his direction. He said goodbye to Sergeant Kowalski the next morning, and to Captain Reeves, and to Colonel Sutton, and to Danny Cho, who shook his hand with great seriousness and wished him a safe journey. He said goodbye to Lieutenant Briggs last, on the same landing pad where she had met him 6 months ago, on a cold gray morning. The coffee I'm bringing home, he told her. 4 kilograms of it. The council is going to ask questions. Tell them it's for research, she said. That is exactly what I intend to say. He boarded his transport and lifted off into the Colorado sky, and watched Fort Dryden get smaller below him until it disappeared behind the mountains. He opened his personal journal, the one he kept separate from the official report, and wrote one final entry. It said, 6 months, 311 pages. I have not captured it. I have described the outline of it, which is the best a report can do. The thing itself cannot be carried in a document. It lives in the people, which is, I suspect, exactly where they want it to be. He closed the journal. He looked out at the stars ahead of him. They looked slightly different than they had 6 months ago. He was not entirely sure why, and he decided he did not need to figure it out. Some things, he was learning, were better left as they were.